Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Robert Wilson put down the glass of whiskey in his hand and looked out the window at the darkening sky. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Manhattan high-rise apartment, twilight was swallowing the last rays of sunlight. He shook the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking against the glass with a crisp sound. It was a Macallan 25-year-old single malt whiskey left to him by his father, and he had been waiting for a special moment to taste it. Obviously, tonight is that moment. Robert's eyes fell on the wedding photo on the bookshelf. In the photo, he and Elizabeth are embracing each other and happiness is on their faces. It was 6 years ago, as if it were yesterday. Their encounter is full of drama, like one of those corny romance movies. It was in the emergency room of the best hospital in St. Louis. Robert had to go to the doctor for an accidental burn. He remembers the day a young apprentice mechanic opened the radiator cap without waiting for the engine to cool down, and hot antifreeze sprayed across his chest. Elizabeth, on the other hand, sprained her ankle while running after work. They happened to sit together in the crowded waiting area. Elizabeth was dressed in a simple sweatshirt, black sweatpants framing her slender legs, her dark brown ponytail swaying gently as she spoke. Even in the midst of the pain, her smile was still bright and beautiful. They talked a lot, from their respective jobs to their life aspirations. Robert tells her that he inherited his father's auto repair store and is working to grow it into a chain. Elizabeth, on the other hand, shared her experience working in banking and her love for the financial field. "Seriously, I never thought I'd meet such interesting people in the emergency room," Elizabeth had this to say at the time. "Even though my ankle hurts like hell right now, I think it's probably the luckiest sprain I've ever had in my life." By then, Robert had been in the automotive repair business for many years. After taking over 3 repair stores from his father, he gradually expanded his business with his love of cars and his great business acumen. He introduced state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment and trained a skilled repair team, making his repair store gradually make a name for itself in the industry. The two quickly fell in love, and after a year and a half of passionate love, they had a cozy wedding. The wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with their heart in every way. Robert had his father's vintage car specially restored as their wedding car. Elizabeth, on the other hand, wore her mother's wedding dress from her youth, and in front of the stained glass windows of the church, they made their vows to be together for life. The first 3 years of their marriage were filled with laughter and sweetness. Robert is devoting more of his energy to his career, and Elizabeth is pursuing an MBA with his support. They spend their weekends cooking together, grilling in the backyard, or simply snuggling on the couch and watching movies. Elizabeth would always let out a silvery laugh at his clumsy cooking, while he would shake his head at her poor ball skills. At that time, Robert felt he was the happiest man in the world. His flourishing career has made great strides. Under his operation, the number of repair stores increased to 8. Each store is equipped with state-of-the-art tire equipment capable of handling all types of tires and wheels. He prides himself on the fact that his team of technicians are able to diagnose and repair automobile problems from virtually any brand in North America, Asia, and Europe. However, the turning point came quietly after Elizabeth earned her MBA. She jumped from her previous bank to a Fortune 500 company as a senior accountant. At first, Robert supported his wife's career development wholeheartedly. He was proud of Elizabeth, even though it meant she needed more time to devote to her work. They agreed to deposit a fixed amount each month into a joint account to pay bills and vacation expenses, but their individual savings accounts and retirement accounts were completely separate. The offer was made at Elizabeth's insistence, and Robert at the time didn't think much of it. But as Elizabeth's assent becomes clearer and more convincing, things begin to subtly change. One of the company's senior vice presidents is retiring, and her immediate boss, Mary, is likely to get a pat on the back, which will create an opportunity for Elizabeth to move up the ladder. In order to capitalize on this opportunity, Elizabeth began to work overtime frequently, even bringing work home on weekends. The initial coziness was gradually replaced by detachment. Elizabeth no longer confides in him about interesting things at work as she once did. Instead, she is impatient and critical. When Robert talks about his career, Elizabeth gives him a cold look and sometimes even interrupts him directly. "It's just a car repair. What's the point?" She would say this with obvious contempt in her tone. To add to Robert's heartache, Elizabeth begins to show disdain for his profession. When asked about her husband's occupation at a company dinner, Elizabeth blithely said, "Oh, he's a car mechanic." That tone of voice, as if talking about an insignificant trifle. Robert felt deeply humiliated, but he chose to remain silent. He knew Elizabeth was at a critical stage in her career and didn't want to let these little things affect her mood. Elizabeth is getting grumpy. What started out as petty arguments quickly devolved into unwarranted accusations. She'd get mad at Robert for not responding to a text message in a timely manner, and she'd storm out because he was making noise while washing dishes. Once, just because Robert forgot to buy her favorite ice cream, Elizabeth turned the entire living room upside down. "Can't you think for me?" she shouted hysterically. "I work so hard every day, and you can't even do this little thing right." Robert tries to understand his wife's stress, but Elizabeth's behavior increasingly alienates him. She began to nitpick everything about him, from the way he dressed to the way he talked, as if anything could be a reason for her to get mad. Things reached a tipping point about a month ago. That day, Elizabeth lost her temper because Robert didn't organize her closet the way she wanted him to. During the argument, she suddenly raised her hand and slapped Robert. It was the first time in a 6-year marriage that physical violence had occurred, but it was a turning point. Robert vividly remembers the moment of shock and heartache, and the fleeting look of guilt on Elizabeth's face. At that moment, Robert felt his heart break. He couldn't believe that the girl who had once smiled brightly at him in the emergency room had turned into the stranger who was now beating the crap out of him. Elizabeth also seems to realize that she has gone too far, and she immediately apologizes. But Robert notices that there is no sincere apology in her eyes. However, the violence did not end there. Last week, Elizabeth was again in a rage because Robert didn't change the oil in her Porsche like she asked. When Robert explains that the warranty should be serviced at a 4S store, she suddenly grabs the coffee cup in her hand and throws it at him. If Robert hadn't ducked in time, that cup might have hit him in the face. What's even more chilling is that Elizabeth doesn't even apologize for it, just coldly turns away. Meanwhile, Robert notices more suspicious signs. Elizabeth began receiving frequent text messages, smiling inexplicably every time she looked at her phone, and quickly turning the screen the other way when Robert approached. Her overtime hours were getting longer and longer, while every time she came home she would immediately rush to the bathroom to take a shower. These details are like little knives, cutting Robert's trust a little bit. These changes make Robert begin to doubt their marriage. He began to think back to Elizabeth's unusual behavior. Those late-night phone calls, the inexplicable overtime, and the fact that she always had her cell phone with her, even under her pillow when she slept. As a man who has been in business for many years, Robert knows that when intuition tells you there is a problem, there usually really is. 3 days ago, he contacted a private detective agency. The decision pained him, but he knew he had to face the truth. Now Robert puts down his glass and picks up the tablet that sits on the coffee table. The screen showed an email from a private investigator. He stared at the unread email icon, his finger hovering above the open button. He knew that once he clicked on the email, their marriage might never be the same again. But he had no choice, for the truth was the beginning of deliverance. Outside the window, it was completely dark, and the lights of Manhattan came on one by one. Robert sighed softly and finally clicked on the email. At this moment, he doesn't realize that this decision will take his life in a completely different direction. But he knew he had to be strong and face whatever was in the mail. Because it's not just about his marriage, it's about his dignity. The email from the private investigator was far more detailed than Robert had expected. As a shrewd businessman, he was used to gathering complete information before making a decision. But this time, every photo, every video, cut into his heart like a sharp knife. The email is divided into 3 parts. The first part is a textual report detailing each of Elizabeth's actions over the past month. The so-called impromptu meetings and overtime were in fact private meetings with her boss, James Brown. The private investigator even lays out a full schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday during lunchtime, they rendezvous at the Hilton Hotel near the office. Friday overtime usually means dinner at an Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town, followed by a night at a nearby boutique hotel. The second part is photographic evidence. The first photo was taken in a hidden booth at the upscale restaurant Le Bernardin, with Elizabeth in a red dress, interlocked with James. Robert remembers the dress that he gave her for her birthday last year. In another photo, they kiss passionately in a parking lot, with Elizabeth's hand in James' suit jacket. It was 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, which was supposed to be work time. There are more photos documenting their intimate gestures on different occasions, snuggling on a park bench, cuddling in the back row of a movie theater, and walking hand in hand in a hotel lobby. The third part is video evidence. Private investigators have installed remote camera equipment in a number of key locations. One of the most heartbreaking for Robert was a video of a hotel lobby. It's their anniversary, and Elizabeth tells him she's traveling on business when she's actually in town on a date with James. The video shows her walking into the elevator wearing a sexy little black dress and holding James' arm with a happy smile on her face. Robert took a deep breath and poured himself another whiskey. As an operator, he understands the importance of planning ahead. While contacting the private investigator, he was fully prepared for his next move. First, he hired the best divorce law firm in town, Solomon Klein & Davis. This law firm is known for handling high-net-worth divorce cases, and although the fees are substantial, their win rate is almost 100%. Second, he created a detailed electronic evidence file. In addition to the material provided by the private investigator, there is also a recent record of Elizabeth's unusual behavior. Those late-night phone calls, inexplicable overtime work, and her propensity for violence. He even videotaped the scene where she threw a coffee cup at him. All of this evidence is encrypted and stored in the cloud and backed up in multiple locations at the same time. Robert opened his laptop and logged into their joint account. On the advice of his attorney, he had prepared two large transfers, one of $120,000 to be paid to the private detective agency and another of $180,000 as a deposit for the law firm. The money is nothing to him, and his chain of auto repair stores is thriving. But he knew that once these transfers were completed, it meant the end of their marriage. He went over what he was going to post to social media again. The posts were properly worded and stated the facts without being defamatory. He made it a point to get the contact information for James' wife, Sarah, and was prepared to notify her at the appropriate time. As a spouse who has also been cheated on, she has a right to know the truth. Just then, there was the sound of Elizabeth's footsteps on the porch. Robert checked the time, 10:30 p.m., earlier than her usual overtime return time. He could hear her light footsteps, obviously in a good mood. Robert sneered and turned on the recording function on his cell phone while making sure the doorbell camera was working as well. Years of business experience have taught him to never rely on a single source of evidence when it counts. Elizabeth walked into the living room with a faint scent of perfume wafting through the air that wasn't her usual scent. Her makeup was still intact, and there was a hint of an insatiable smile at the corner of her mouth. "Honey, are you drinking?" She saw the whiskey in Robert's hand, and there was a hint of dissatisfaction in her tone. "It's not good for your health to be drinking this late in the evening." "Yeah," Robert said lightly. "Some things are really hard to take without a drink, like finding out your wife is cheating on you with someone else." Elizabeth's face turned pale for an instant, but quickly regained her composure. Her years of experience in the workplace have taught her to remain calm in times of crisis. "What are you talking about? Are you drunk?" "Don't pretend, Elizabeth." Robert pushed the tablet toward her. "You want to see you and James in action?" The quality of the photos and videos taken by the private investigator were very good, especially that date you had at Le Bernardin, where you wore the red dress I gave you, which complimented you very well. Elizabeth picked up the tablet, her fingers shaking slightly. When she saw the pictures, her lips began to tremble. Robert noticed that her gaze lingered particularly long on certain photographs, scenes that she thought were hidden but had actually been exposed long ago. "It's not what you think," her voice trembled a little. "It's just a working relationship. We're just discussing projects." "Discussing projects in a hotel room?" Robert asked with a sneer. "Tell me, Elizabeth, do you discuss quarterly statements in bed or analyze market data in the bathroom? By the way, I'm especially curious. How did your project discussion go on our anniversary?" Elizabeth's expression changed from panic to anger. "You sent someone to follow me? How dare you do that? It's an invasion of privacy. You pervert." You have the nerve to talk to me about privacy when you're sleeping with another man in our marital bed? Robert's voice remained calm, but the words were like knives. By the way, I've sent this evidence to James' wife, Sarah. I think she's probably enjoying the photos right now. After all, as a spouse kept in the dark, she has a right to know the truth too, don't you think? Elizabeth's face turned pale instantly. What have you done? How could you do this? James has 2 children, and you're going to destroy their family this way. Do you realize how much damage this will cause? So in your eyes, it was me who destroyed their family, not your infidelity? Robert shook his head. What interesting logic. When you were cheating on them in the hotel room, why didn't you think about hurting their families? It's none of her business. Elizabeth screamed. It's just between us. You have no right to meddle in someone else's marriage. No, this concerns everyone. Robert stood up and walked towards the study. You know what? I've posted these photos on LinkedIn, and guess what? Your coworkers will be interested in your overtime content? I also tagged the company's human resources department, who should be particularly concerned about inappropriate relationships between executives and subordinates. Elizabeth went after him and grabbed his arm. You can't do this. This will ruin my career. I'm begging you, delete those posts. Just like you ruined our marriage. Robert shrugged off her hand. You think I'm going to let you guys get away with this all by yourselves? The moment you betrayed me, you should have expected the consequences. Just then, Elizabeth's cell phone started vibrating like crazy. Message notification after message notification flooded in, and she shuddered as she opened her phone to find her Facebook and LinkedIn tagged in a post. That post detailed her affair with her married boss, complete with photos taken by a private investigator. To make matters worse, the post has started to get reposted and the comments section is filled with condemnation of her. You asshole. Elizabeth screamed. I hate you. You've ruined everything for me. I'll never forgive you again. No, Elizabeth, Robert said calmly. It was you who chose betrayal. I'm just letting the truth come out. By the way, in case you haven't noticed, I've taken some money out of our joint account. Part of it was paid to a private investigator and the other part to my divorce attorney. Elizabeth immediately opened her mobile banking app, and when she saw her account balance, her entire body froze. How dare you touch our money? She growled. It's illegal. I'm going to sue you. Our money? Robert sneered. Those are legitimate expenses for investigating marital infidelity and upcoming divorce proceedings. If you want to sue me, go ahead and get a lawyer. Though in your current situation, it might not be too good to find a lawyer willing to represent you. Elizabeth sat paralyzed on the couch, tears finally coming to her eyes. Her defenses completely collapsed. Can we ever get it back? She asked in a low voice. It was just a mistake. I can end my relationship with James. We can start over. What did you say? Robert leaned in close to her, sarcasm in his voice. I thought you said this was just a working relationship? How come it's now time to end the relationship? That's quite the inconsistency in your lies. Elizabeth looked up with a pleading look in her eyes. Robert, please, we can start over. I know it's wrong, really. This marriage is important to me. Starting over? Robert laughed. After you made a joke out of our marriage? After you cheated on me with another man in our bed? Do you think this kind of damage can be repaired with an apology? Just then, Elizabeth's cell phone rang again. It's James calling. She hesitated, but picked up the phone. Robert could hear hysterical shouting coming from the other end of the line. Apparently, James' wife Sarah was having a fit. The call ended quickly, with despair written all over Elizabeth's face. Sarah's divorcing James, she murmured, and the company has suspended him. They're going to launch an internal investigation. Really expected, Robert said. After all, no company likes scandals between executives and subordinates. This could affect the company's reputation. Elizabeth stood up suddenly, a crazy gleam in her eyes. You ruined everything. You hateful bastard. What gives you the right to do that? I'm going to make you pay. Robert silently picked up his cell phone to make sure the recording was still going. He knew that the next scene might be ugly, but it was just the proof he needed. As a businessman, he knows that every detail could be a key bargaining chip in the endgame of this marriage. And Elizabeth's loss of control just gave him his last bargaining chip. Robert had expected Elizabeth to lose control, but he didn't expect things to get this intense. Elizabeth's eyes became strange and fierce, like a beast driven to extinction. She grabbed the glass vase on the coffee table and slammed it at Robert. It grazed his ear and exploded against the wall, crystal shards flying everywhere. "I'll kill you!" Elizabeth screamed hysterically. "You asshole! You've ruined everything for me." She rushed at Robert like a whirlwind, swinging her fist into his chest. Robert subconsciously raises his arm to cover himself, but still gets her nails scratched on his cheek. Robert resisted the urge to fight back and just kept backing away. As a businessman, he knew that every action at this point could be used against him in court. His cell phone was still recording, and the security camera in the living room was silently recording it all. Elizabeth's violence is gathering more evidence in his favor. "Elizabeth, calm down." Robert tried to calm her while carefully avoiding her attacks. "Violence won't solve anything." "Shut up." Elizabeth grabbed her cell phone and slammed it in Robert's face. This time she didn't miss, and the phone hit Robert hard in the forehead. The intense pain made him black out, and warm liquid ran down his cheek. He touched his forehead, his fingers stained with blood. Elizabeth froze for a moment at the sight of blood, but quickly returned to her frenzied state. She grabbed Robert by the collar and began shaking him frantically. "What gives you the right to do this to me? Do you know how much I've put into this job? Do you know how hard I've worked?" Robert didn't struggle, letting her vent. He knew the police would be here soon. He had quietly dialed 911 before Elizabeth went crazy, and the phone had stayed on the line. The dispatcher should have heard enough. Sure enough, within 5 minutes, sirens sounded outside the door. 2 policemen quickly went upstairs and rang the doorbell. Elizabeth visibly panicked when she heard the sirens. She let go of Robert and took a few steps back, the scowl on her face replaced by fear. "Police! Open the door!" The police shouted from outside the door. Robert straightened his collar and walked toward the door. Elizabeth stood still, as if she hadn't recovered from the shock. When Robert opened the door, the 2 officers immediately noticed the blood all over his face. "Sir, what happened?" one of the policemen asked, while surveying the interior warily. "My wife," Robert said calmly. "She just physically assaulted me. I have audio and video evidence." He pulled out his cell phone and pulled up the video he had just recorded. The police watched the video carefully and then looked at Robert's injuries. Elizabeth suddenly changed her attitude at this time. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. We were just arguing. I didn't mean to." Her voice became soft with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Robert. I really didn't mean to hurt you." The second police officer approached Elizabeth. "Ma'am, please cooperate with our investigation. Based on the scene and the evidence, we need to arrest you, and you have the right to remain silent." "What? No, you can't do this." Elizabeth became agitated again. "Robert, tell them it's a misunderstanding. You can't do this to me." There was no pleasure in Robert's heart as he watched her being handcuffed, only deep exhaustion. At one time, he had loved this woman so much, and now he had to watch her being taken away by the police. But he knew that it was a necessary process. The police took detailed notes of Robert's statement, photographed the scene, and downloaded the video evidence he provided. One of the officers advised him to go to the hospital to have his injuries examined and advised him to apply for a restraining order. These injuries required stitches, police said, and it appears from the video that her behavior constituted serious domestic violence. "For your safety, I strongly recommend that you get a restraining order." Robert nodded. "My attorney will handle this." As the police car left with Elizabeth, Robert sat in his wrecked living room and sent a message to his lawyer. He knew that this night was just the beginning of the whole divorce process. The next morning, Robert's attorney, Dwight Solomon, filed a motion for a restraining order. After viewing the video evidence, the judge immediately granted a temporary restraining order prohibiting Elizabeth from approaching Robert's residence and workplace. The judge took the case seriously, Dwight said by phone. Elizabeth's violent behavior and death threats were captured on audio and video. "That's good for us." In the meantime, Elizabeth is being held in custody awaiting a bail hearing. Her parents hired an attorney to try to defend her. But when the judge looked at the video evidence and the hospital report on the injuries, His attitude became unusually harsh. The defendant's behavior demonstrated a clear propensity for violence, the judge said, and given the seriousness of the case, I am setting bail at $50,000 and requiring the defendant to wear an electronic monitoring device for the duration of his bail. At the same time, I granted the plaintiff's application for an injunction. The defendant shall in no case approach within 500 yards of the plaintiff. Elizabeth's attorney tried to defend her. Your Honor, my client was just in the heat of the moment. She has a steady job. A steady job? The judge interrupted. As far as I know, she's been suspended from the company for misconduct. And the video clearly shows that not only did she engage in a serious physical assault, but she also made explicit death threats. This goes way beyond spur of the moment. It was the next afternoon when Elizabeth's parents finally came up with the bail money. Elizabeth walks out of detention and finds her life turned upside down. Her cell phone was stuffed with missed calls and texts, mostly from angry friends and family asking about the veracity of those posts on social media. Her email received a formal suspension notice from Human Resources that the company would be investigating her inappropriate relationship with her supervisor. To make matters worse, she realized that she could no longer go home. The restraining order required her to move out of the house she shared with Robert immediately. She had to stay at her parents' house temporarily, wearing an electronically monitored ankle bracelet, while she waited for her official court hearing. Robert had begun formal divorce proceedings during the time Elizabeth was in custody. His team of lawyers moved quickly and prepared exhaustive divorce pleadings. The complaint included not only evidence of Elizabeth's extramarital affairs, but also her record of violent behavior. We'll be filing for a fault-based divorce on the grounds of atrocious behavior, Dwight explains. And with that evidence, the judge will likely uphold our claim. That means we'll be in a much better position when it comes to property division. Robert nodded. As a businessman, he understands that sometimes tough measures must be taken. Elizabeth's violent behavior gave him more leverage, but it wasn't the result he wanted. He'd rather they end the marriage with honor. However, things are far from over. When Elizabeth is served with divorce papers, she loses control again. She ignored the restraining order and drove straight to Robert's office. The security guard stopped her in time, but her screams drew a number of onlookers. You coward! She yelled into Robert's office. You ruined my life. I'm going to make you pay. Security immediately called the police and Elizabeth was rearrested for violating a restraining order. This time, the judge was even harsher. Her bail was revoked, and she must await her formal trial in jail. Robert felt a deep wave of exhaustion as he watched Elizabeth being taken away by the police again. He thought back to the night they met, in the hospital waiting room, where Elizabeth's bright smile had touched his heart. Who would have thought that 6 years later they would end up like this? Sometimes, he said to himself, it takes more courage to end than to begin. He turned and walked back to his office, ready to start a new day. After all, no matter what happens, life goes on. And the end of this marriage may just be the beginning of a new life. Elizabeth's parents, Michael and Catherine Thompson, never expected to see their daughter in a prison visiting room. Through the heavy glass, they looked at Elizabeth in her orange prison uniform and for a moment didn't know what to say. Elizabeth's eyes were red and swollen, obviously having cried. Michael clutched his wife's hand and tried to suppress his anger. It's all that asshole Robert's fault, Michael whispered to his wife. He deliberately set up our daughter. Catherine nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. We have to help Elizabeth. She can't stay here forever. Elizabeth described what happened to her parents over the phone, her revised version, of course. In her narrative, Robert turns out to be a narrow-minded, calculating villain, while she is merely a victim of her quest to advance in her career. She deliberately downplayed her affair and did not mention her violent behavior. Dad, you've got to help me find a good lawyer, Elizabeth pleaded. All that evidence Robert has is taken out of context. He's setting me up. Michael immediately expressed his full support for her. Don't worry, baby. I know a great lawyer who will be able to get you out of this mess. I won't let that scumbag get away with it. After the visitation, Michael and Catherine drove directly to the office of prominent attorney Peter Walsh. Walsh is known for handling high-net-worth divorces and charges outrageous fees. But after listening to Michael's account, Walsh's expression turned serious. "Mr. Thompson," Walsh said cautiously, "I need to see what evidence the other side has. From what you've described, the situation may be more complicated than you think." When Walsh looked at the evidence Robert provided, his expression became even more grave. "With all due respect, this is a very difficult case." The evidence available to the other side was strong, including clear video footage and audio recordings. More importantly, your daughter's 2 violations of the restraining order have seriously affected her credibility in court. But Michael didn't want to hear that. "Money is not an issue," he said. "I want you to help my daughter win this case by any means necessary. That car mechanic thinks he can bully us just because he has a few stinking dollars." Walsh sighed. "Mr. Thompson, it's not about the money. Even if we put up a defense that your daughter lost control due to stress, the video's explicit death threats and violent behavior on her part would hardly be accepted by a judge as extenuating circumstances." Just then, Catherine's cell phone rang. It was one of Elizabeth's co-workers calling to tell her that Robert had posted some more pictures of Elizabeth in the company group. Michael was completely enraged when he heard the news. "I'm going to make that asshole pay," he growled, ignoring Walsh and storming out of the office. Catherine followed and tried to stop her husband, but it was too late. Michael was already in his car, heading straight for Robert's office. They arrived just in time to see Robert walk out of the office building. "You scumbag!" Michael rushed up and grabbed Robert by the collar. "Who are you to slander my daughter like that?" Robert kept his cool. "Mr. Thompson, please watch your behavior. There are security cameras here, and your current behavior constitutes assault." "Fuck the surveillance." Michael became even angrier. "You ruined my daughter's life. I want blood on your hands." Catherine rushes over as well and hits Robert with her handbag. "You devil! It wasn't enough to put our Elizabeth in jail. You had to keep hurting her." Security quickly arrived on the scene, but Michael and Catherine had completely lost their minds. They kept abusing Robert, threatening to kill him and burn down his company. Crowds of onlookers pulled out their cell phones to record the scene, which would soon appear on social media. Michael was still making his last stand when the police arrived. "Just you wait," he shouted at Robert. "I'll make you sorry you were born on this earth." Robert just watched it all calmly. His lawyer, Dwight, is on his way, and this new evidence only puts the Elizabeth family in a worse position. The next morning, Elizabeth breaks down in jail when she learns of her parents' arrest. She was frantically pounding on the walls and screaming to see a lawyer. But Walsh has decided to drop out of the case. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," Walsh said over the phone, "but under the current circumstances, I don't think I can provide you with effective legal assistance. Your behavior, and that of your parents, has seriously affected the direction of the case." Robert's legal team sprang into action and filed a lawsuit on behalf of Michael and Catherine's behavior. The judge, after watching the surveillance video, strongly condemned their behavior. "Such blatant threats and acts of violence are unacceptable," the judge said, "and given the seriousness of the case, I order that the defendants be subject to coercive measures and a restraining order be issued prohibiting them from approaching the plaintiff and her place of work." As word spread, other members of Elizabeth's family began calling, but not to support her, but to chastise her for bringing shame to the family. Her cousin Jane said bluntly in the family group, "Elizabeth, you need to face reality. It was your infidelity and violent behavior that led to this. Stop treating everyone else like the enemy." Meanwhile, Robert's legal team begins to compile new evidence. Elizabeth's parents' behavior not only puts themselves in legal jeopardy, it also secures more leverage for Robert. "The judge will see that this is a systemic problem," Dwight told Robert, "and Elizabeth's violent tendencies are clearly not accidental. Her parents' behavior suggests that this may be a familial problem. It's very good for our case." Walsh eventually writes Elizabeth a letter suggesting that she seriously consider reconciliation. "Continuing the confrontation will do you no good," he wrote. "Robert has overwhelming evidence on his hands, and your family's behavior will only make it worse. I suggest you accept reality and end this strife as soon as possible." But Elizabeth refuses to accept the offer. While in prison, she began writing letters to various law firms trying to find a lawyer willing to take her case. However, when these lawyers learned the ins and outs of the case, they politely declined. There is no longer any chance of turning this case around, a senior lawyer told her. And the wisest thing to do now is to seek a settlement and try to reduce your punishment. Michael and Catherine also faced serious legal consequences. They had to dip into their savings to hire an attorney to defend themselves, as well as deal with a civil lawsuit filed by Robert. Their proud social status was dealt a severe blow, and neighbors began to look at them differently. "We thought we could help Elizabeth," Catherine told Michael late one night, "but now it seems we've just made it worse." Michael was silent for a long time before he finally said the words hidden in his heart, "Maybe. Maybe we were really wrong. Elizabeth did do something he shouldn't have. We're doing her a disservice by siding with her." The end result of this drama was that Elizabeth's parents were sentenced to probation for threatening and assaultive behavior, as well as having to take anger management classes. They will also have to pay huge damages and attorney's fees. It was a crushing blow to the ever-privileged Thompson family. Elizabeth, on the other hand, spent long days in prison waiting for her trial, watching her carefully constructed life crumble step by step. Her career is in ruins, her social circle is falling apart, and even her parents, who have always been supportive, are in trouble because of her. On a quiet night, Elizabeth lies in her prison bed and finally begins to reflect on it all. Maybe, as Walsh says, it's time to face reality. But she wasn't ready to admit her mistake. Her pride wouldn't allow her to do so. Early one morning 3 months later, Robert stood at the window of his law office and looked out at the steady stream of traffic. Today was his and Elizabeth's final divorce negotiation meeting. The morning was extraordinarily cold, and the mist hung over the city like the gloom that had hung over his life for the past 6 months. Attorney Dwight walks into the conference room with a stack of papers in his hand. "Elizabeth is already downstairs," he said, "and her new lawyer, Mark Anderson, just called to confirm. It looks like she's finally willing to accept reality." Robert nodded. After months of legal tug-of-war, Elizabeth finally found a lawyer willing to represent her. Mark Anderson, a pragmatic man, convinced Elizabeth to accept the settlement talks. After all, given the current situation, continued confrontation would only put her in a more unfavorable position. At 9 o'clock sharp, the door to the conference room was pushed open. Elizabeth walks in, much slimmer than the last time Robert saw her. The orange prison uniform was replaced with a plain professional outfit, but the haggardness on his face couldn't be hidden. Her new lawyer followed close behind, clutching a thick folder. "Good morning, Robert." Elizabeth's voice was a little hoarse, her eyes wandering to look directly at her ex-husband. That once strutting woman looked so vulnerable at the moment. Robert nodded politely in greeting. "Good morning, Elizabeth." He noticed that she still wore her wedding ring on her right hand, which surprised him a little. Attorneys for both sides began reviewing the divorce agreement line by line. The division of property was quickly agreed upon. Robert kept his premarital assets, including his inherited real estate and the growing chain of auto repair stores. Elizabeth, on the other hand, keeps her personal accounts and investments. Funds remaining in the joint account will be used to pay attorneys' fees. With regard to the restraining order, Dwight said, "We are recommending that it be extended to 1 year after the divorce, given the violence that has occurred previously." Elizabeth's attorney looked at her, then nodded in agreement. "My client accepts the offer." Robert noticed that Elizabeth shivered slightly at the word violence. That out-of-control night left indelible scars on both of them. The wound on his forehead had scabbed over and fallen off, but the wounds inside were far from healed. The negotiations went surprisingly well. Elizabeth seems to have lost all will to resist and accepts every clause. A brief silence fell over the room as the attorneys discussed the technical details. "You know," Elizabeth spoke suddenly, her voice soft, "I used to think you weren't good enough, that you were just a car mechanic. Now I realize that I was the one who was stupid." Robert looked at her calmly. "Everyone has their value, Elizabeth. Not all success can be measured in terms of position and salary." "Yeah," Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "And look at it now, you're thriving and I've lost everything. Job, reputation, freedom. Even my parents are in trouble because of me." "It's not a matter of success or failure," Robert says. "It's a matter of choices and consequences. Everyone is responsible for their own choices." Elizabeth's eyes flashed with pain. "You're right. I'd sell my soul for a promotion. I thought I'd get everything I wanted that way, and I ended up losing everything that really mattered. The lawyers returned with the final documents that needed to be signed. As Elizabeth prepares to sign, her hands are visibly shaking. Wait, she said, I want to give this back to you before I sign it. She removed the wedding ring from her ring finger and carefully placed it on the conference table. The ring glowed softly in the sunlight, like the happy times they had had. Do you remember what you said when you proposed? Elizabeth asked softly. Robert certainly remembers. It was on a star-filled night when he got down on one knee and promised her eternal love and fidelity. Remember, he said, but some promises, once broken, can never be repaired. Elizabeth nodded, picked up a pen, and signed her name. Her strokes were heavy, as if she wanted to pour all her resentment and remorse into this signature. And one last thing, Robert said, removing his wedding ring. This should be returned to you as well. Elizabeth looked at the plain gold ring and tears finally flowed uncontrollably. Why did it come to this? She asked, sobbing. We could have been happy. Maybe, Robert said, but we all made our choices. You chose betrayal. I chose the truth. Now, we are all responsible for our choices. After the signing ceremony, Elizabeth stood up and straightened her clothes. She looked like she was going to say something, but eventually just sighed softly. Goodbye, Robert, she said, and good luck to you. You too, Elizabeth, Robert replied. I hope you learned something from this experience. Elizabeth nodded and turned to leave the conference room. Her footsteps faded away in the hallway, like their marriage, which had finally become a thing of the past. Robert remained standing at the window, watching Elizabeth walk out of the building and get into the waiting cab. The sunlight poured through the mist and onto the streets, adding a touch of warmth to the morning. Feeling okay? Dwight came over and tapped him on the shoulder. I honestly didn't know, Robert said, that 6 years of marriage would end like this. Even though I know it's for the best, there's still some emptiness in my heart. It's normal, Dwight says. It's never easy to end a relationship, even if it's terminally ill. But you made the right choice and handled it appropriately. Robert looked at the 2 wedding rings in his hands and remembered the vows and expectations they held. Finally, he placed the ring in his suit pocket and turned to face the lawyer. So, how long will it take for the paperwork to be fully processed? In about 2 weeks, Dwight replied. When the judge signs it, your marriage is officially terminated. Robert nodded. Good. It's time to start a new life. As he walked out of the lawyer's office, Robert took a deep breath of the early morning air. The city had fully awakened, and the streets were bustling with activity. He thought back to that night they met in the emergency room, to their first date, to all the good memories. But now that will all be in the past. Life is like that. When one door closes, there is always another one that opens. Robert knew that he was ready for this new beginning. He pulled out his cell phone and sent a message to his assistant. Schedule a meeting for this afternoon. We're going to discuss the location of the new store. The sun was getting brighter, dispersing the last of the mist. Robert walked to his car, an inexplicable relief rising in his heart. This is not the end, but a new beginning. As with every store he runs, failure is just a stepping stone to success. And for once, he could finally let go of the past and focus on his future. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.